Hey everybody, welcome to CEFC. If I don't know you, I'm Pete. So glad to be with you guys this morning. I don't know how many of you guys know of this particular musical, but this is a musical that Irving Berlin wrote. Not this, but the next one that's coming up here. This one was written by a guy by the name of Irving Berlin in 1946. It's called Annie Get Your Gun. It's interesting to me because when I was in high school, I did a lot of musicals. I really liked them. In fact, some of you that are in the room with me this morning were in some of those musicals with me. But we never did Annie Get Your Gun. So ironically, I don't think I've ever even seen the musical. In fact, this morning, you might be looking at that thinking, yeah, that's way before my time. I don't know. However, there's a song that was performed in this musical that I think kind of stands the test of time. If you know it, then maybe you'll kind of like resonate with it when I just sing it to you for a minute. It goes, anything you can do, I can do better. I can do anything better than you. You guys know what happens next? Somebody says, no, you can't. Yes, I can. No, you can't. Yes, I can. And they go back and forth, right? It's kind of a funny song. Interesting thing about that song is it's kind of like permeated into our culture. In fact, if you have children or if you remember what it's like to be a kid when you were a kid, maybe you felt like one-upping other kids was something that you just kind of did on a regular basis, or if you listen to kids do it. But if a kid says, hey, I just jumped over that rock, another kid says, yeah, well, I jumped over, you name it, whatever they say. Or if they say, well, I can climb up that wall right over there. Well, I climbed up that mountain. Well, I scored 10 points in the basketball game. Well, I scored 35 points in the basketball point. It's kind of like kids are always one-upping each other. But what's crazy about that is one-upping just kind of continues along as we get a little bit older. Competition is really built into our culture. For all of us, we feel like there's a need for us to feel like we're better looking than somebody else, or we're more popular or more athletic. There's always this feeling of needing to be better with our life. Let me just talk about it a little bit from the world of sports. I don't know if you guys remember who this guy is. His name is Michael Jordan. So in the 90s, Michael Jordan was like what we would call the GOAT, the greatest of all time. So as the GOAT in the 90s, there was nobody that was ever going to be better than Michael Jordan. In fact, it felt like he could hang in the air forever. Like when you saw Michael Jordan play, he's like looking somewhere else and he's about to dunk this ball, and it's like inevitable. He's going to dunk it. It just felt like he could hang in the air forever. I remember watching games where he would just like be out at the edge of where anybody should be shooting 3 points with time like running out on the clock, and he nails a three-pointer and wins the game. Michael Jordan was just like you knew he was going to be a legend forever. But over the last couple decades, there's been other players that have been proclaimed the GOAT. Like this guy, for instance, named LeBron James. I don't know if anybody else calls him the GOAT, but I think he calls himself the GOAT. But LeBron James, which I don't know, you're not supposed to be able to call yourself the GOAT. That's kind of, it just doesn't feel right. But it's strange, there was somebody that was the greatest of all time, which feels like it should just be a permanent thing. You're the greatest, but other people come along that we then call the greatest of all time as well. And he's like 62 points away from scoring more points than anybody else in NBA history. There's a guy by the name of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar who scored 38,387. He's going to score more than that in his career, probably in the next 2 games if he hasn't already done it. It's crazy. He's a really good player. But ironically, there's another guy that just came out that's really good at dunking. His name's Ja Morant, and everybody watches Ja Morant and thinks that guy can hang in the air. And probably in our future, there's going to be terminology around him or other guys like him that we then call the greatest. Okay, let me just give you another example. In the 90s, Joe Montana was like the greatest football player of all time. If you ever watched Joe play, man, just watching him throw the touchdown to Clark in the back of the end zone is an iconic thing. But then Jerry Rice came on the picture, and so Joe Montana was just so good, threw so many yards to Jerry Rice, and was remembered for a long time as the greatest quarterback until this guy came along, Tom Brady, and ruined all his hopes and dreams because he won more Super Bowl championships than anybody else in history. And anytime he steps on the field, he just retired for the second time. We'll see if it sticks. But anytime he steps in the field, people are like, he's the greatest. He's the greatest player that's ever played. Until next week when this guy plays, maybe Jalen Hurts might be the greatest player of all time. Come on, let's go, Eagles fans. Eagles. All right, so yeah, it's going to be a good name next week. Anyway, it's funny because around every corner there's an opportunity to be one-upped. It just feels like everybody's always trying to be greater. Let me give you one more example. So this mountain is called El Capitan. It stands in the middle of Yosemite National Park, and it's 3,000 feet tall, and it's just made of granite. That's the way God made it. And it's massive, right? So like for a long time, for hundreds of years, for decades, people were thinking that they wanted to climb El Capitan. Until, I believe the year was like let me just look at my notes here. What is it? 1958, this guy. Warren Harding? Yeah, Warren Harding. He was the first to ever climb El Capitan. Now, he used ropes, and he had a lot of help, but he was the first guy to ever do it. And so, like, again, looking at this climber, like, he's the greatest. He's the best climber, right? But since then, lots of people have tried to climb El Capitan. And just recently, the most recent person to do this, which is stupid and crazy, but in June 4th, 2017, this guy, Alex Honnold, he climbed El Capitan again. Except the way that he one-upped the other guy was that he climbed it with no ropes. No ropes. 3,000 feet in the air, and he's climbing. It doesn't even make any sense to me how that's even possible. But he climbs El Capitan with no ropes. And so, like, it seems like every time you do something amazing, somebody is right around the corner trying to do better. And I wonder, like, what is it that drives us? What is it that drives us to feel like I have to do better than the other guy? I just want to do more or be more or accomplish more. But we do this too. You don't have to be a superhuman athlete to be trying to one-up people all the time. In fact, if you think about, like, every time someone's ever told you a story, maybe you can relate with this. How many have ever, like, listened to somebody telling their story, and while they're listening, you kind of zone out because you're thinking about the story you're going to tell that's better than the story they're telling you? You know what I'm saying? We all do that. Come on. Think about, like, this. When somebody's talking to you and they're telling you their problems, we're always thinking about our advice that we're going to give them because from my wise standpoint, I can offer so much advice to you because I know how to do life better. or jobs. We're constantly in our jobs, we're trying to seek higher positions so we have more authority over the people that are beneath us. It just seems like there's always places in our life where we're trying to one-up. We have this inescapable need to get more laughs from people. We want more attention. We want more pay. We want more stuff. We want more position. We just want more. We just want more because we want to have more than the other people, more than our neighbors, more than other people that are looking at us. I think I've told you, like, if you guys have attended church before, then you've heard me say this. I was a youth pastor for a long time. As being a youth pastor, there was something that was super annoying to me as being a youth pastor. You might be assuming to yourself, it's middle schoolers, right? But no, middle schoolers, I thought middle schoolers are awesome. They were not annoying. The thing that was the most annoying about being a youth pastor was having to meet other youth pastors. And the reason why it was so annoying was I did this when I worked here and also when I worked in Ohio, but we would get together with groups of youth pastors, and it always seemed like this is going to be great. It's camaraderie. We'll talk about student ministry, and it's going to be so good. And I'm telling you, it only took about between 3 and 10 questions to come to the inevitable question that they always asked. Inevitable. It always happened. It would be like, what's your name? What's your church? You know, we're 4 or 5 questions in, and then, and how many people are in your student ministry? I literally heard a youth pastor one time sitting across from another youth pastor saying, I've got the best thing happening in all of Berks County. Mine's the biggest youth ministry. I'm telling you, to the number, every single time I ever met with one, everyone always inevitably asked that question because they wanted to know, was my youth ministry bigger than your youth ministry? Do I have more kids attending? It's crazy. There was something that was happening inside of every youth pastor's brain. It's common knowledge. Because I think all of us, we dream about climbing higher. We dream about getting better, achieving more, so that maybe somebody along the line in our life will declare to you some way, shape, or form, you're the best. You're the best. As if we just want people to recognize us in our own hall of fames, to build statues in our honor, to put us on gold medal pedestals and look at us and think we're the best one. You've accomplished the most. Do you guys remember, if you're church people, if you've attended church before, then you remember the story of Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, just for those of you who don't attend church, they were the first children to be born of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve have these kids, they raise them up, they become adults. So they're young adults. And God asks both of them to bring an offering to him. And so they both bring an offering. Let me just show you what happens when they brought their offering. It said, the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. So Cain and Abel both bring an offering. God's like, Abel, your offering, good. Cain, your offering, no, not so good. And instead of Cain saying, oh, what can I do better? Instead of Cain just looking to God and saying, how can I serve you more, God? Instead, his rationale was very human-like. His rationale was, you know what? I think because God said, my brother's better, I'm just going to murder him. And he did. He just murders his brother because God said that he's better than him. It's crazy to think that that is just so much a part of our culture, wanting to be better. But it's interesting that the conversation that Jesus was having with a group of people one day, as his disciples were following him, he was having a conversation with them that was honestly a lot about this whole topic in general. And so I wanted to jump into what Jesus was talking to his disciples about in this day. It said, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. So Jesus' disciples were sitting around, they're having a conversation, and ironically, they're talking about this very idea. They're having a dispute arose among them about which one of them is the greatest. As if one of them is saying to Jesus, no, Jesus, I'm your favorite, right? Jesus, it's me. Another one elbowing him and saying, no, it's me. And then another one saying, listen, no, Jesus, tell them I'm your favorite. Tell them I'm the one you love. Jesus, I'm the one, right? And so Jesus looks at them and he begins to give them some advice. And his advice isn't just the advice of a mere man. His advice is the advice from God. And when we as listeners can hear God's advice and we can take his perspective, we have an opportunity for something in our lives. We have an opportunity for change when we listen to God's advice. So we're going to dig into this morning of how Jesus looked at this perspective, of when his disciples were sitting there and they were saying, hey, we want to be the greatest. We want to be remembered. We want to have the statues built to us. How did Jesus respond when the disciples had this very same struggle that's very human, it's very intrinsic to all of us? How did Jesus respond? All right. Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. So Jesus, he says, listen, kings and leaders of the day that are over the Gentiles, over everybody who's not, from our Jewish nation, they tend to lord their power over them. They try to control people that are beneath them. They try to make them feel the weight of their power. And inevitably, as they get to this place of power in their life, they look back on the people that are beneath them and they feel as though they're beneath them. That I've accomplished more than you. I'm in charge of you now, and so you listen to me. They lord their authority over them. And then they go a little bit farther in to say the fact that we're the benefactors here. That this is success. When we have an opportunity to lord our power over someone else, we're winning. When I can tell somebody I'm better than you and I have more authority than you and I'm more powerful than you and I can tell you what you have to do, I'm winning. And so Jesus is trying to make this point here that these kings and these leaders, that when we look at them, they've become corrupt by the positions that they hold. That when they've gotten to be better than other people, it got to their head. And so they become corrupted by that. And so Jesus looks at this circle of people that are looking to him for leadership and guidance, and us who are looking to him for leadership and guidance, and he says to them, but you are not to be like that. You're not to be like that. Anytime Jesus says who, I think it's it's important for us to ask who, because clearly Jesus was talking to the group of people that were sitting there, the disciples, and he says, you should not just be like that. But he's also really just saying, you who follow me. Maybe it wasn't just his 12 that were sitting there that day, but it's people that are following Jesus. And that's where I think we can look at this and apply what he's about to say to our lives. Because if we call ourselves followers of Jesus, you who follow me are not. You're not to be like that. You're not to be like that. And Jesus he's about to give like a new idea in human behavior. And new ideas are important because for all of time, new ideas, they change the way that we live. Let me just give you a for instance. new ideas in travel happen all the time. In fact, before people ever came up with the idea of travel, they would walk everywhere. But then people began to have the idea of domesticating horses and animals. It was the first idea of travel that ever happened. Horses and camels, I'm sorry. And so they domesticated horses and camels and learned to travel a little bit faster. And then they invented the wheel. And following that, they invented riverboats. And following that, they invented the steam engine and then the automobile. And then in 1903, these two guys came along that decided we got to figure out a new way to travel. In December of 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright, for the first time, they launched a powered plane. And Orville was the pilot. It was a new idea in travel. And in this new idea of travel, when he did that, he flew for about 20 feet and it lasted for about 12 seconds. But that idea that they pushed to the brink and ran all those tests and did all that stuff, that idea changed the way that we travel. See, new ideas, they change things in us. And here's the thing. When Jesus offers us a new idea, it's important that those of us who are listening take notes. We take advice from God. Because he's God giving us a new idea, and his ideas have the power to change everything in us. So what was the idea? He said, you're not to be like that. What did he say? Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. Now, I don't think Jesus is saying right here that the greatest of you should be like, immature children. He's not saying that we should be immature, clearly. He's saying like you should be the youngest. When you think of young kids, something that the youngest haven't done yet is they haven't accomplished a lot. They haven't accomplished a lot. They got no plaques to hang on their wall as the youngest. They have no deeds to brag about because they're the youngest. And what he's saying is you should be like the youngest. You've accomplished nothing. The greatest among you should be like the youngest. And the one who rules like the one who serves. The general application there is the one who serves is the one who has no rights. The servants in the area were not the ones who had the estates and the power and everything like that. The one who serves have no rights. So he's saying the greatest among you should act like you haven't accomplished anything. And if you want to rule, you should be like the one who has no rights whatsoever. Now, this is it punched in the gut the idea of competitive nature for everybody that was listening that day. In fact, this wasn't like the world-conquering, Jerusalem-leading, Roman-crushing advice that everybody was looking for in this moment. And I think knowing that, Jesus kind of doubles down and digs into what this idea really means. He said, for who is greater? He asked him this great question. The one who's at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who's at the table? He asks them this question and tries to get these guys to pick. Poses, like any great communicator, he poses the question for them. Who's the one that's greater? Is it the one who's sitting at the table, or is it the one who's serving at the table? And I think this is a good question for them to evaluate. I mean, do you want to be drinking the wine, or do you want to be pouring the wine? Do you want to be eating the food, or do you want to be preparing the food? Do you want to be finishing your plate? Or do you want to be the one in the back who's cleaning the plates? Do you want to be relaxing at the table, or do you want to be working? Do you want to be demanding that people come over here and serve you, or do you want to be meeting people's demands? Do you want to be powerful, or do you want to be without power? And I think when Jesus asks this question, everybody around the room is leaning in because nobody wants to be the servant. Everyone wants to be the honored guest. And so they're looking at Jesus, and I think they're feeling like, yeah, exactly. We're on the same page now. Because that's what we were feeling. We were feeling we want to be the one who's sitting at the table. And Jesus says, yeah, is it not the one who's at the table? That's the one who's greater, right? Like, yes. Okay, Jesus, yes. The one who's at the table. Then he says this, but I am among you as the one who serves. So they're all leaning in thinking like, oh, yeah, one at the table. And then Jesus says, oh, but I'm actually the servant. I'm the servant. You might think that greatness is found in receiving and achieving. But I got to tell you something, guys. I'm the one among you who serves. It's kind of the opposite of what you thought. And then he leans in and says this, you are those who have stood by me in my trials. Not only is me who serves, but you're with me. So Jesus is the servant, and followers. Followers are also, if you call yourself one, you are also the servant. Because following isn't seat at the table behavior, it's servant behavior. And if I want to call myself a follower of Jesus, then I'm going to model after what he's modeling, and this is the model. It's not the one where the greatest is what I get and what I achieve. The greatest is the one who lowers himself to become a servant. And so he says this last thing to him, and I think this is great. He says, and I confer on you a kingdom. I'm giving you a kingdom, just as the Father conferred one on me, just as Father God has given it to me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. He's like, listen, guys, I want to give you my kingdom, the same kingdom that my Father has given me. And I want you to be sitting at the table. I want you to be sitting at my thrones and judging the 12 tribes. That's what I want for you. The thing is, you can't do that. You can't rule in my kingdom unless you're willing to be a servant. If we look at the statements that he just said, I'm going to hand you this kingdom, but ruling in my kingdom is done as servants. Rule in my kingdom is not done with an iron fist. His message to his followers is that the more you become a servant, the more ready you are to lead. The more you become a servant, the more ready you are to lead. And I think that message is transferable through time to us. That if we call ourselves followers, then that message is true. That the more that I become a servant, the more I am ready to lead. The more I become a servant, the more I'm ready to lead. The more I lay down my rights, the more I consider others, the more I lift others up and don't seek to make myself great, but make others great, the more I'm ready to lead. So I think like to the group that Jesus was speaking to that day, this was like new. It wasn't what they were expecting. It was life-altering. But for those of us who sat in seats like these for a long time, you've come to church and you've sat in rows and you've heard guys like me speak from the stage, then these words aren't new. And in fact, coming to church just can't be about learning new things, because if you've come to church for a long time, then you've learned it all. You've heard it all. And it can't just be about that. Think about it like this. Like if Orville and Wilbur Wright just collected all this data and knowledge and all this like stuff, and they compiled it together and made books about how to fly airplanes, but they never took that knowledge and turned it into practicality, that they never built a plane and they never tried to go fly it, if they never practiced what they had learned, then what good would it have been? It wouldn't have changed history, certainly. And just knowing information, just knowing that me as a human being might struggle with the idea of being a goat, trying to be the greatest of all time, trying to be better than everybody else, just knowing that isn't enough. Without the application, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. That's why in another conversation that Jesus was having with his disciples, he said this statement that I think it really applies to this conversation he was saying. He said, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The practice is the part that's really important here. Because hearing the words and not putting them into practice, in this particular story, was the guy who built his house on the sand. So building our house on a firm foundation includes us saying, I'm listening to what Jesus is saying, and then I'm putting it into practice. I'm listening to what he's saying, and I'm applying the things that he says. So I think for us this morning, it's really important that we kind of like ask ourselves some questions. Where do we land when it comes to some of this feeling inside of, am I trying to be the greatest? So I want to leave you with a couple questions this morning just to kind of wrestle with as you get out of here. Do you struggle with trying to be the greatest? Do you struggle with trying to be the greatest? If you do, if you're here this morning and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I kind of relate with that feeling of like, I've always tried to be better, then I would say you're not alone. And you might even be here this morning and you're thinking to yourself, I don't struggle with being the greatest. I struggle with feeling I'm not good enough. Honestly, if you're feeling this morning like I'm not good enough, then it's really in the same vein. It's that same feeling like I can't be as good as they are, so I'll never be enough. And we feel the same tension there where I wish I could be better. I wish I could be more popular, or I wish I could have more. It's all kind of lives in the same vein of struggling to be the greatest. That wrestle as we look around at the people around us and think, can I have more than them? Can I accomplish more than that person? Do I drive a nicer car? So the follow-up question to that is, where does this struggle have power in your life? Where does it have power over you? It's unique for all of us. I mean, some of us might, find common ground on some of the things we struggle with, but some of us might not. What's the struggle look like for you? Where do you feel like you need to be the greatest? Is it in areas of control? You want to have more control over people? You're kind of a control freak, and so you feel like you need to control every situation? Does it come down to popularity for you in the sense that you want to be the coolest guy walking through your neighborhood with the best-looking dog, the most well-groomed, or the house that's the nicest on the street, the car that everybody is in envy of? Is it the nicest? You want to have the nicest stuff, nicest shoes? Because at the root of it, at the root of this struggle is this feeling of I want to elevate myself. It's self-elevation. It's that everybody looks at me and the world can kind of revolve around me. It's self-centric. I hate the term, but it's egocentric. And even in the feeling of wait, are you calling me egocentric right now? You might be feeling defensive because we don't want anybody to challenge our position on what we think about ourselves. Because we want to be known as the greatest. So just knowing that being great in God's kingdom equals being a servant doesn't make me any more of a servant than watching a Bruce Lee movie makes me a ninja. It doesn't make me into a servant just knowing it. So let me ask you another question. How are you doing at choosing to be a servant to those around you? How are you doing at choosing to be a servant? Because the practice is the part that makes all the difference here. Just knowing the words doesn't make it enough. It's when I take the words of Jesus and I say, I got to put that into practice. And you got to be careful here because we're not talking about trying to earn favor in God's eyes. He died on the cross for us when we were still sinners, when we were still messed up. It's not like we do enough stuff that God loves us. He loves us when we're imperfect. Well, we're talking about what it looks like to be a follower here this morning. And so practice doesn't make perfect, but practice does make me more like a servant. So how are you working this morning into making yourself more like a servant? Because if you're like me, then you haven't mastered this. And you can just go ahead and ask my family to find out, hey, is he a perfect servant at home? And the answer would clearly be no. But how are you doing at putting it into practice? Because the reality is that if you want to live ready for authority, if you want to live ready for power, if you notice this, what Jesus said, he actually, when he was talking to his disciples, he didn't tell them, I don't want you to have authority, I don't want you to have power. He didn't say any of those things to them. In fact, he actually said, in my kingdom, you're going to have those things. He just simply said a nuanced term to them. If you're going to lead, if you're going to be in power, don't do it as one that thinks that you're better than other people. As you gain influence and as you gain stuff, don't lord it over others and shove it in their face and let them think that you're better. Our perspective of ourselves should be less than others. We should lower ourselves. If you want to rule, then be a servant as you rule. So the last question I wanted to ask you, in what area of your life today can you serve more? In what area of your life can you serve more? Maybe if you're a dad, when you walk home, I know that so often as I walk in the house, I think to myself, hey, I've been at work all day, so now I have certain rights. My rights are I get to do what I want, kick my shoes off and put them on the table, and people should serve me. So as a dad, I think because I did my work all day, I have the right to be served. But maybe you might be thinking to yourself as a dad today, well, but what has God called you to do? He's given you a position as a father. That doesn't mean you should lord it over your family. How do I choose to be less at home? And maybe as a mom, you're thinking to yourself, yeah, but everybody demands that I serve them. I don't have any options. I got to serve people all day, my family all the time. But when it comes down to it, the question that Jesus is posing to us is, when you're given the positions that you're given, how do I make myself less? How do I have the same attitude? I think Jesus, he shows us to this, or actually Paul shows us to this perspective one more way. He said, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but rather he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant. See, looking at Jesus' life in retrospect, from Paul's perspective, he was God. He had all the authority and all the power. He had risen to the greatest of all time, no doubt. But yet he didn't consider that to be used to his own advantage. He had all the authority and all the power, but yet he decided to humble himself and make himself nothing, taking on the very nature of the servant. And he starts us off by saying, have the same mindset. See, I'm not up here this morning saying that this is something that's easy. I'm just saying that that's what following looks like. That's what following looks like. And the best way to figure out right now in your life, am I serving others, is to think about whether how you respond when someone says to you or demands servitude from you. When someone demands you to serve them, how do you respond? Because often my response is, hey, listen, you can't challenge me. I'm above you in position. But Jesus was above all of us, and he lowered himself and took on the very nature of a servant. The more I become a servant, the more ready I am to lead. That's what Jesus revealed to his disciples that day. That if you want to be great in his kingdom, I got to choose to lower myself and make myself less. Jesus, we thank you that your example to us is one that's challenging. It's not easy. And I can rattle off about 1 million excuses as to why it's good for me not to serve others. But you've called me to more than that. And I just pray this morning, God, that you'd help me to see that, the different areas in my life where I need to serve more. The excuses that I've built up to make it seem like it's okay for me to get away with my selfishness. Because in an attempt to try and be the greatest that everybody looks at, I tend to tread on other people and make them lower. But Jesus, you said that greatness doesn't come. It's not hand in hand with what I have. It's not hand in hand with how I look. It's not hand in hand with how good I am at sports. Greatness is something that's found when I lower myself and take on the nature of a servant. So Jesus, I pray that you would help me to follow you. Help me to see the places today that I'm not doing that very well and choose to follow you more. It's in your name we pray, Jesus.